Welcome. I'm Randy Osborne. You're listening to the Bible Science for Kids podcast from a uniquely young earth biblical creationist perspective. This is Cycle 2, Lesson number 23, Heat. But before we start today's lesson, let's do a quick review of our last lesson, Lesson 22 on light. Do you remember? What are some ways light is observed? Answer: some ways light is observed are like a mirror, reflection, like a pencil in a glass of water, refraction, like a rainbow, spectrum, like a ripple, wave, and like a photon, particle. Remember, refraction means bending when light goes from one substance to another substance. Refraction from one substance to another. Good job. Who's proud of you? I am. We are in Cycle 2. This is Lesson number 23, Heat. Thermodynamics, Greek therm, meaning heat, and dunamis, power, is the branch of science that deals with heat, energy, and how they move and change. It studies how energy is transferred between objects and systems, especially how heat is converted or transformed from one kind of energy into other forms of energy, like motion, and vice versa. In simple terms, thermodynamics is the special science that helps explain how engines work, why ice melts, how refrigerators cool, and why hot things cool down over time. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy is not created or destroyed by physical processes. The first law is commonly known as the law of conservation of energy. It is informally summarized in the equation energy in equals energy out. And what does happen to energy that seems to disappear? Energy that seems to disappear is either transformed to another kind of energy or transferred to another place. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that energy naturally spreads out and that all things fall apart over time. Remember the concept of entropy? Entropy means that energy or matter are disordered, mixed up, randomized, or spread out. The universal law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, helps explain everyday events like death and decay. The third law of thermodynamics explains that it is impossible to reach the state of absolute zero temperature. Recall that the third law of thermodynamics teaches us important truths about the limits of nature and how even science points to a world and a universe with boundaries, laws, and limits. And that these natural limits were not some random occurrence of chance, but they were intentionally created and established by our Creator God. So, thermodynamics literally means heat power, which makes sense since it originally described how heat could be used to do work, moving things, like running a steam engine. Let's listen to what God's Word says in John 18:18, the New King James Version. Now the servants and officers had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Question: how does heat flow? Answer: heat flows by conduction, convection, and radiation. Heat is a type of energy that we feel every day. It warms us up, it cooks our food, it even helps our bodies stay alive. Scientifically, Heat is energy that moves from something warmer to something cooler. We can't always see it, but we can feel it, like when we touch a warm cup of cocoa or stand in the sunshine. Heat is everywhere, and it's an important part of how God designed the universe to work. The science of heat wasn't always well understood. For a long time, people thought that heat was a kind of invisible fluid. In the 1700s and 1800s, scientists like James Joule and Lord Kelvin helped prove that heat is actually a form of energy. Joule even did experiments to show that motion could turn into heat. He was a Christian who believed that God created a world full of order and purpose. Joule once said, "The laws of nature are the laws which the Creator has imposed on matter." His faith and science went hand in hand. One way heat moves is through conduction. This means that heat travels through solid materials when they touch. For example, if you place a metal spoon in a hot pot of soup, the handle gets warm too. That's because the heat moves from the top end to the cooler end. The hot end to the cooler end. You can test this by placing one end of a metal rod in hot water and feeling the other end after a few minutes. The other end will get warmer. Materials like metal are good conductors, while wood and plastic are not. What does it feel like when you walk barefoot on a hot sidewalk in the summer? Hot. Why? Conduction of heat from the sidewalk directly to your feet. Another way heat moves is through convection, which happens in liquids and gases, both of which are fluids. Some people say hot air rises, but that statement doesn't show much understanding. First of all, it is not the heat that makes the air rise. Hot solids don't rise. Air is a fluid, which means it can flow. So individual molecules of air are not stuck to each other like the molecules of a rock are. Air expands when it gets hot. That means that the molecules spread farther apart from each other. So they act like light, fluffy marshmallows floating instead of acting like heavy, dense rocks sinking. Warm, expanded fluids rise, while cooler, condensed fluids sink, creating a circular motion. When gravity pulls the cooler, dense fluid down, that sinking, dense fluid pushes the expanded, less dense fluid out of its way and up. This force is called buoyancy, pushing it up. This is how air moves in weather systems. A simple way to see convection is to add a drop of food coloring to a clear cup of warm water. Watch how it swirls upward. This shows how the hot water molecules are moving through the water. God uses convection in nature, like in ocean currents and wind patterns, to help keep Earth's temperatures moderate or balanced. The third way that heat travels is by radiation. This means heat moves as waves through space, even without touching anything. The warmth you feel from the sun or a campfire is radiation. You can try a simple demo by standing near a sunny window or putting your hand near, not touching, near a warm light bulb. You'll feel the heat without touching the source. Radiation is how Earth gets heat from the sun, even though space is mostly empty. Heat is a powerful, invisible force that God built into the world. It always naturally flows from where it is to where it isn't. If the pan is hot and your hand is cold, placing the hot pan on your hand while insisting that heat rises will not stop your hand from being badly burned. It moves in different ways by conduction, convection, and radiation, and helps keep life going. Scientists like James Joule, who were believers in God and the Bible, studied heat and energy to understand God's creation better. Whether it's warming the earth, cooking our meals, or glowing in the sun, heat shows us both the power of nature and the greatness of God's design. If everything had already reached the same temperature, a condition called thermal equilibrium, then this world and this universe could be ancient. But as it is, hot things have not been around long enough to cool off, and the cool things are too young to have warmed up. When you feel the heat energy of the toaster on your cheek while you make toast for breakfast, what kind of heat transfer allowed the heat to travel to your skin without moving any hot air and without touching you at all? Radiation moves that heat to you. What would ironing clothes be an example of? What kind of heat transfer? Ironing clothes, the heat from the iron passes directly into the fabric because the two are touching. So this is conduction. When warm air from a heater rises towards the ceiling while cooler air sinks to the floor, what is this movement of heat by the flowing of hot fluids called? Convection. This is convection. Now listen again to what God's Word says in John 18:18 of the New King James Version. Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Question: how does heat flow? Answer: heat flows by conduction, convection, and radiation. Thank you for listening to the Bible Science for Kids podcast from a uniquely young earth, biblical creationist perspective. I hope to see you next time for Cycle 2, Lesson number 24, Electricity. Until next time, this is Randy Osborne reminding you to keep trusting and serving the Lord. And don't forget to tell a friend about this podcast. Remember to share things that are good with those who you love. Who's my student? You are.